Welcome to the Envision Rise podcast. I am your host, Staci Hegarty. I'm also the COO of Envision Rise. Joining us today is Tammy Alvarez, and Tammy is the CEO and founder of Career Winners Circle. Welcome, Tammy.
Thank you, Staci. I am so glad to be here. I know we've had a couple reschedules, so I'm really glad that we have a chance to meet.
I'm very glad you're here, and you just shared with me that you are coming to us from Mexico City, so thank you so much for fitting us in your busy schedule.
Great to be here.
Let's start with the easy part. Introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Tammy Alvarez, the founder of the Career Winners Circle, where we empower business leaders to make a big impact and love every Monday again. And that is really what we're all about. So if you wake up on Sunday or you start to get that pit in your stomach on Sunday nights and Monday is just a slog, that's really what we're about, is helping you transform that no matter what you're doing in terms of your career, business ownership, or whatever. I started my career in corporate America. So I've got about 25 years of hard time in corporate. I was a C-level executive for Fortune 100 companies on Wall Street. So I'm a financial services girl at heart. And I loved what I did, right? Big problems, big transformation opportunities. My team and I were running into burning buildings as everyone else was running out. So my adrenaline junkie got fixed. And I really loved it until I didn't. And then there was this moment where I just felt like I just stopped caring about everything. And so about 6 years ago, I cashed out of Wall Street, moved to a tropical island off the coast of Belize in Central America, and started the Career Winners Circle. And as an entrepreneur, I had no idea what I was doing. I made every mistake imaginable. But now we're sitting here with 7 coaches on the team, serving clients around the world and really making a big impact. So that is a short version of a very long story.
Well, that tropical island piece, you are definitely living the dream in some ways.
This before COVID even, right? So when I was telling my friends and my colleagues that, I was going to do all this work through Zoom, they're like, what's Zoom? So when you think of it, wasn't that long ago. But yeah, the whole idea was just completely foreign to so many people.
Well, you mentioned the Sunday blues, the Sunday scaries, that feeling of it, how you feel on Sunday kind of reflects what's going to happen to you on Monday. That it really is like if on Sunday you are feeling yuck and nervous and uncomfortable and stressed out already, first of all, you're taking up your day off feeling that
Right,
way.
a good weekend, right? So yes.
So, what can people do to address that short of moving to a tropical island?
That's a bit extreme, right? Even for the most adventurous. So we don't recommend that for everyone. And I think there's a few things to think about. And the most important thing that someone can do when you start to get that pit in your stomach on Sunday nights, and it never fails, Staci, my email starts blowing up around 4 o'clock every Sunday night because everybody's online trying to get ahead of the week, miss deadlines, dreading the insanity in terms of these meetings that we're doing. All of this stuff just becomes really, really difficult. And one of the biggest things I think that people forget is that loving Mondays isn't some type of esoteric pipe dream. It's actually necessary. And it's as necessary as the air you breathe and the water you need to survive. And when people start to realize that this isn't just a luxury item and that this is something that I need for myself because of the wide ranging impact it has on your whole life fulfillment, then you start to take a totally different approach. And, we talk about how do you get out of that soul crushing grind? It was funny. I was in Chicago a few months ago and I was facilitating a 3-day strategy session and I was early. So I grabbed a cup of coffee and I sat in the lobby. And it was a lobby with a bunch of different companies in it. So it wasn't just one company. And I live in Mexico City, right? And I work remotely. So I don't get to the lobbies of companies very often. And I was looking. And I swear the zombie apocalypse had invaded Chicago. Everyone was just shuffling in and like no one was making eye contact, smiling. I was just like, what is going on here? And so if you feel like you're part of the zombie apocalypse, it's time to make those changes. And, so one of the biggest ways to do that we work with our clients with is really changing that mindset to becoming that CEO of your career. Because when you start to treat your career like a business, you start to show up differently, you play more powerfully, and you make a big impact and you bring on a lot more of those elements of control that I think a lot of us feel are missing.
And, I think that's an interesting concept because for so many people, they feel like all the control is at that top level of the organization. And the CEO is making me miserable. The CFO is making me miserable.
They don't get it. right?
Yes.
Whatever they are, right?
But there are so many more people working roles that are not the fancy C-suite titles. And what I hear you saying is that everyone has some control over how they feel about their career.
Yes, and in any economy, right? So let's face it, after COVID, it was an employee economy.
Mhm.
You could write your own ticket, whatever you wanted, you had. There was a massive shortage. Now the pendulum has shifted the other way. And now with all the layoffs, and people are feeling a little bit more exposed and vulnerable. But here's what I want our listeners to really lean into today is that we tend to think the system has failed us. We do great work, it doesn't get recognized. The schmuck gets promoted instead of you because they can politic better. Like all of these things that, we are impacted by. But here's how I want people to think. The system builds the road, right? They pave it, they put the guardrails up so you don't go off the cliff, they set the speed limit. But at the end of the day, none of us are driving autonomous cars yet.
Mhm.
You are the one driving your car. You get to decide what road are you going to drive on? How fast are you really going to go? And ultimately, what music are you going to play on that road trip?
Ah.
And so, so when we start to feel disenfranchised, we have to realize that the system is in place, but it's a tool for us to use for growth, not a inhibitor for us to just wait our turn, which is really where a lot of people fall off the track.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece of it that people are just sort of waiting for something to happen
Yes.
and hoping that they will be noticed and not really doing the things that we need to do to get noticed, to get some control over where we're driving in that car. What kinds of leadership development can individuals be working on, whether they are at a leadership level? Because frankly, I feel like a lot of times people do get promoted into a leadership role based on their performance as an individual contributor. And we are then surprised that they don't have the skill set yet to be a solid leader, that they have the skill set to lead amongst other individual contributors, but not as a department leader or an organizational leader. So, what should people be thinking about? What should we be working on? What should we be paying attention to if our ultimate goal is to move up?
So, great question. And we have this really weird phenomenon. It happens from first time managers to CEOs and everything in between, where you get promoted and all of a sudden you're expected to know all the things. It's like yesterday you were not that person, today you are. And then all of a sudden, some miraculous pixie dust was supposed to get sprinkled. So you know all the things. And that's obviously not how this works. We all know this intellectually, but emotionally, we don't. And I think part of being a leader that inspires courage and part of stepping into that, becoming that leader that people choose to follow, there's three tricks up my sleeve that I want to share with your audience today. And the first one is to really anchor and align to doing the work that lights you up. You get promoted because you're good at what you do, but then your skills diversify and your time gets spread across more things. But when we spend time doing things that you could do for 12 hours straight and never be tired and end the day more energized than when you started, that is the first step. And then the things that do not come naturally to you, that do not energize you, find other ways to get that work done to minimize the time that you're doing that. Because the things that light you up and the things that don't, there's other people who love to do the things that you don't.
Mhm.
Like for me, this lights me up, right? Speaking to communities and coaching my clients and working with our coaches. I love this stuff. I can do it all day, keynote speeches, all that stuff. But running my finances and my social and my strategy and all these other things, I can do them. I can do them well, but I hate it. Right. I mean, 2 hours later, I'm tired throwing pencils at the ceiling. I'm like, I'm a little bit of sugar high, right? I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. And so step one is to really lean into the things that you love, find other strategies for the things that you don't. And then the next step after that is to play to your strengths. I think so many people are in what I consider this toxic cycle of self improvement. And I do think you need to continually strive and grow. But when it makes you feel less than, when it makes you feel that you can't, that's toxic.
Mhm.
And so when you play to your strengths, if you took every ounce of your time, energy, and money and focus that in strengthening your strengths instead of trying to get adequate with something that you'll never be good at, you are going to grow so much faster and make a bigger impact. And so, you've got your vision, you know what lights you up, you play to your strengths. And that way you're able to grow even faster. So those are some of the things in terms of being able to inspire courage. And then the last thing I want to talk about is fear, because it is a mean one, right? And when you are lit up with what you do and you play to your strengths, you're naturally going to show up bigger. You're going to play bigger. You're going to lead from the front. You're not hiding under your desk hoping you don't get fired anymore. But then what happens is now that you're in your moment, then the fear shows up. And then that can be debilitating. And we treat our inner voice the same way. Like we treat like all the things we say to ourselves as the same thing, but it's really not. I have what I call the fearsome four, right? It's your inner critic, your second guessing, your imposter syndrome, and then your low self confidence. So if you realize these are not the same, they show up differently, they're cyclical, and how to shorten that cycle, then that really does help you become that leader with courage, because now you have the tools to shorten that cycle of fear that slows so many people down.
You've mentioned courage. I want to dig into that a little bit further because so often what I see, and I'm sure you see this as well, that where leaders really get themselves into trouble is when they're displaying maybe bravado or arrogance, but it's not courage. And how do we build that courage within ourselves to be able to lead a department, an organization, or even just ourselves in
Mm.
the direction that makes the most sense for our success?
The way we do this effectively is by getting comfortable with failure. And I'll walk through this, right, in terms of how to get that courage. A little backstory for me, just to kind of explain where this comes from, where these insights come from, is, I grew up poor. My family didn't have a lot of money. When I was 15, my parents divorced. Long story short, my dad disappeared. We were homeless for quite a bit. And then my mom was ill equipped to handle all of the things that life just threw at her. And so by the time I graduated high school, I had no ambition, no money, and my grades sucked. I was like, okay, I'm not going to go the traditional path. And so I decided, okay, I'll get a job and then I'll just go back in a few years once I've found myself and know what I want to do. But then I kept getting promoted and I kept getting promoted to the point where I didn't get my college degree until I was 40. And I was leading a team of 1,500 people at the age of 35. And so when you want to talk about getting comfortable with fear, right, that is something that, I was living the imposter syndrome before it was even a thing. It didn't even have a
Mhm.
name yet. And that was because I never belonged. I didn't come through the ranks like everyone else did. And so my ability to know I had nothing to lose because I didn't, and everything to prove to myself in terms of I could do this, then this is where these perspectives came from. And I think generally speaking, people are paralyzed by fear and they're paralyzed by failure. And we have this opinion that success and failure are opposite. But the reality is, you cannot fail or you cannot be successful without having failed. Full stop. So if you are avoiding failure, you actually preventing success. And that's easy to say, right? It's like, okay, whatever, but you look bad, you get demoted, you get layered, you make stupid decisions, expensive decisions, you get fired. Like all of these things are real fears. So how do you come through this? How do you get to that point? And you take on what I call an experimental mindset. When we have this binary opinion that everything is good, bad, right, wrong, success, fail, you're not going to win, right? You're just stacking the decks against you. But when you have this experimental mindset and like, what does this button do? And you push it and you're like, you don't expect everything to be amazing, but you know that things are not going to be a colossal failure either. So you take the stuff that works, you get rid of the stuff that punched you in the face, and you do it again. And what surprises me is companies have gotten really good at agile software development,
Mhm.
right? But yet we don't give ourselves the same grace. And so you can become much more comfortable with the concept of failing when you take on that experimental mindset, because nothing is a full failure. It's a learning opportunity. And when you're vocal about it and you don't pretend with that bravado, because that's where you get busted, is when you have this big, bravado and then something goes wrong. Well, then people are dying to knock you off your pedestal,
Mhm.
right? When you go at it with a service mindset and a bit of humility and saying, I don't have all the answers. The field is changing fast. I think this is the best path forward. Let's do a little bit and assess and re-go. Then I think that gives you a much more comfortable way to look at success and failure in a different way.
I think that's such an important point that everything is changing so fast. We have not seen transformation like this in the workplace ever.
Ever. And I've been in
So
in business a long time. It
Yeah,
is not, yes.
it's honestly going to require so much courage, and it's going to require being willing to not only fail, but to fail fast. And
Yes. And
that's
fail forward.
yes, yes. So tell our listeners, for those who may be thinking, what does fail forward mean? Because we think of failure as going back.
Mhm. So how you fail forward is you take those learnings and, publicly. So I have learned so much more from my failures than I have from my successes. And when you play big and you fly close to the sun, everyone sees all the things, and people are
Mhm.
so much more happy to talk about the things that you screwed up, right? So it's like, all right, that's fine. We're going to do that. These three things went really well, but these things did not. What did we learn? And what can we do differently the next time we try? And, okay, so, and when those things don't go well, you obviously have to triage, get them back on track. And how did that go? And did you do all the things that you could have done fast enough, smart enough, early enough to mitigate the damage of the mistakes that you make when it's inevitable, when the field of play is changing so significantly? So I just think, admitting to yourself and to others that you're not perfect, because everyone does know, believe it or not, and being able to have that humility to say, I'm taking big risks and we're going to learn from them and we're going to adjust. That's how you fail forward.
And to me, that really sums up what we're talking about when we talk about the growth mindset. You were talking earlier about playing to your strengths and not getting yourself so wrapped up in trying to learn how to do everything perfectly. This is a growth mindset, not learn how to do everything perfectly and stretch yourself so thin and stress yourself out. But it's really about being able to look at data, whether that's anecdotal or if it's actual quantitative data, and say, okay, this thing didn't work, but this part did. So, what did we learn from that? Rather than treating failure as a thing to be afraid of, a thing to be ashamed of, that we will grow much better as individuals and as organizations if we can treat failure as truly an opportunity to learn and grow. And having that growth mindset is so important. And it's something that I worry a little bit that new leaders don't feel comfortable with.
Sure.
How do you get comfortable when you're suddenly promoted and you've done all the things right, and now you've got, your fancy new title or whatever, your nice new office or whatever it is, and you are thinking, I'm going to fail, whether that's imposter syndrome or simply just not knowing enough.
Well, and I think you're going to fail.
Yeah.
Let's not pretend you're not, right? And so, from that perspective, especially for new leaders, and particularly new leaders who are now leading their peers, the ones that used to be their peers, that's completely awkward. Coming at it with that level of humility, saying, I don't really know anything more than I knew yesterday, but I'm willing to try, and we need to do this as a team, and giving people permission to, call you on your BS, quite frankly,
Mhm,
and say, you want people to tell you you're wrong and that your baby's ugly, and that
mhm,
there's got to be a different way to do this, because that's how you have a better solution. So if you suddenly take this command and control approach that, oh, I got it, I'm the leader, so I've got to, march the troops, that's the terrible way. That's the wrong way to do it. But when you start with that collaboration, saying, okay, as a team, we need to solve for this. And everybody has a different position on the field, but all the positions are important. And, it's like any team sport, right? You have one weak link,
mhm.
then you're not going to win. And the coach doesn't win the game. It's the players that win. And so when you start to think about that, and as a new leader, you start to take that approach, now all of a sudden you're moving from this, very command and control driven leadership style, which is not effective, to making the transition into the type of leader that people will actually choose to follow, because leading through influence is much more difficult than leading through hierarchy. And so I think for new leaders, think about that analogy in terms of player coach, and you really use that to start to grow into your next opportunity.
Now, as we start looking at the youngest generation that is in the workforce right now, the Gen Zs, my daughter's generation,
I made one. I got one too.
she's not quite in the workforce yet, but if what I'm seeing at age 15 is any indication of the adult she's going to be, leaders are going to have to do things differently. And what we know is that the younger workers are different than older workers, not just in how they work, not just in how they grew up. And I know it's popular to kind of pile on and say, oh, they have all these ridiculous expectations and they're so spoiled and so entitled. Frankly, every generation has had that when they enter the workforce. I'm Gen X. They
Yeah.
called us slackers. They called us lazy.
All
So
the things, right?
yeah,
So
so
yes.
some of that's just a rite of passage, but we're also looking at the most diverse workforce we've ever seen. So, how do we go about making an equitable environment for the most diverse workforce that North America has ever experienced?
Yeah, and that's such a great question and such a passion for me in terms of the whole DEI landscape. Because, being a woman on Wall Street and often the youngest woman on DEI, believe me, and paving the way for others, but we're missing something very, very important. We're making strides in diversity. We have a long way to go for parity. We're not even close, but we are making strides. But where I think we're really missing the ball here is in equity. And let me talk to you about what I need. There's this one video I watched on YouTube that just punched me in the face. It was so provocative. And it's like this light came on. I finally got it. And so John Taylor Cummings has this video on YouTube. And what it is, he's got a bunch of college kids, all shapes, sizes, and colors in a park. And they're all at the starting line and they are going to run a race and they're going to run a race to win $100. But before they run this race, he's like, what I want you to do is I'm going to say a couple of phrases. And if that's true for you, take 2 steps forward. And if it's not, stay where you are. And then he started saying things like, take 2 steps forward if you had a private education. Take 2 steps forward if your parents are still married, if you still have a father figure, if you never had to have your parents pay your bills, if you knew that you were going to get a free ride to college, even if you weren't an athlete. And on he goes with these things. And then he stops and lets everyone look around. And obviously, there's people in the front, there's people in the back. And he's like, for you in the front, if you think you are winning this race fair and square, you're not, because everything, the reason you're here has nothing to do with you or any decisions you could have made. And for you in the back, you still have to run your race. And that to me was so powerful. And I think from an equity perspective, what we need to do in terms of that next generation is to give them the experiences and expose them to the same things that the ones at the front of the race have. So that way, when they are ready, like totally
Mhm.
ready. Not these, I've gotten metrics I need to hit. Let me put the most likely candidate in and then let them struggle. Right? Like that's just not the best way to do this. And I think as we look at the upcoming generation and our next gen, the more focus we can put on equity, then the faster we will achieve equality. And so that's where I think we need to be in terms of how we're thinking about the next gen.
And I'm hoping that for our listeners that what they're hearing is this means invest in your people and invest in them early. That for a while there, it felt like we just sort of expected leaders to appear ready-made, and that they were just sort of put on this earth in order to accept a leadership role. And that's not the case. I think some of us do a better job than others of portraying that we are leaders, whether
Yes.
we're in that role or not. But I think it's so critical that organizations really focus on training and development with their employees, because that's going to not only level the playing field, but it's going to help identify high potential employees that you may not even realize are there because they're introverts or they don't look or act or show up like every other leader before them has. And something that you talk about is break all the rules.
Yes.
So, what are some rules we should be breaking?
Oh, there's some good rules, right? I think rules apply to others. And so if they're holding us back, then we definitely need to lean in on some of these. And the first one we started to talk about in terms of loving every Monday. Many people think that's a pipe dream or reserved for select few. And once we give ourselves not only the permission, but the expectation that I deserve to love Mondays and I'm not going to accept anything less than that, and then do the work it takes to get to that point, I think that's the first rule that a lot of people really, start to have those aha and those breakthrough moments. It's like, okay, this is not how it's supposed to be. It may be how it is for many, but it's not how it's supposed to be. And I have the power to be able to change that. I think another thing that holds people back is the belief, and this is everything from C suite on down, that in order to be happy, you've got to give something up. And this is such a random, and it's so pervasive. It's like all of a sudden it's like, no, I'm going to have to get less money. Like I'm willing to take less money to be happy. I'm like, why? Your skills still apply, right? Or I'm willing to take a step back to be happy. I'm willing to do this. And so we immediately go in with this scarcity mindset that there's a trade-off that, there's got to be a catch somewhere to be happy
Mhm.
and to have that career fulfillment. And there's not. And I think the reason people feel this way is because if you do it wrong, that happens. You get the pay cut, you get demoted. If you show up like a rookie and like an outsider, you're going to get treated like one. But when you do it correctly, that never happens. Like I usually coach, and our teams usually coach mid to senior level leaders who are making, I'm a Wall Street girl, so my guys are making a ton of money, and they're pivoting into things they've never done before, and they're making 20% more off of a giant salary. So if you do it right, it doesn't have to be that way. So that we're going to have to give up all the things we've worked so hard for to be happy, and most of us aren't willing to do that. I think, another rule that you want to think about in terms of breaking is this concept that, you have to have the experience and the skills to actually do that role. And when you move into leadership, that becomes less of an issue because you start to move into leading functions you've never actually done before. And one of the things that drives me crazy is how quickly we dismiss our skills and experiences. And so I want to offer a mindset shift for our listeners in terms of looking at your skills as the assets that you will use to buy your next opportunity. And we give our assets away. Oh, I did that a long time ago. I'm not an expert. My team did it. I didn't. And then we're sitting here with like a third of what we've done in terms of our experience and hoping to trade on that. And it's not going to work. So when you look at it like an asset and everything is critical, then you're going to be looking under your sofa on the couch and under your car seat and turning out those jean pockets to find every skill you can, because take credit for those, because that's what you'll use to buy your next opportunity. And then one of the other ones, then we can certainly move on to something else I'd like to talk about is, we've got this idea that people won't hire from outside our industry.
Mhm.
And if you're in an industry that you hate, that could be really rough. Like financial services is not fun anymore. A lot of people in healthcare, they're not having fun anymore. And there are industries that are growing and having a good time, and they want to pivot to those. And so what you want to do is take all those things that we talked about earlier, your strengths, your vision in terms of alignment, and find an opportunity where they're in high demand and in short supply. And I'll give you a really quick example. So one of my clients, Phil, career financial services guy, 20 years. And in financial services, this is how it works. You fire 20% of the people every year. You just do. And you still have to be innovative, and your people have to be engaged, and you have to get stuff done. And doing that for 20 years, it just becomes part of his DNA. But he was getting bored. He had been in the industry for a bit, wanted to make a move, and ended up making a move into a company that was very different, but originally was a fast growth startup. Now, this company was the land of milk and honey. They had so many investors that were backing them. Every time they had a problem, they threw more money at it, more people, more toys. No was not ever something that was spoken. They go public, their industry takes a nosedive, and their competition gets their act together. They're losing money, and their shareholders are having a conniption fit. Now, the leadership team there grew up in this company. No one knew how to do more with less. No one had an idea of how to be innovative and shrink because they didn't know. Now, Phil rolls in, and he's a rock star because all of the things that he's done for 20 years that are so instinctive are like breakthrough moments for these leaders that have never had that experience. And not only did he do it for his department, he took on a service mindset and helped the others leaders get there too. And so when I talk about find your sweet spot and then find a place where it's in high demand and in short supply, that's how you can do that. And, he's making a bigger impact and more money than he ever thought possible, than he ever would have achieved in financial services.
That impact piece is so important, that it's great that you've got a skill set, but being able to share that with people and show others how to do it is critical to the growth of an organization. And I honestly feel like when we help others, whatever that looks like, it in turn helps us more. It helps us grow. It helps us figure out what are the things that we are good at? Where is our sweet spot? And being able to share that with others is so impactful.
It is. And when I started the company, I made so many mistakes, right? It was a disaster. Yeah, it was such a hot mess. But, one of the things that I started to do is actually listen to my audience. And I expected promotions, power, control, all of these things, title. And at the end of the day, one thing that showed up 100% for everyone was making an impact. That is what motivates people.
Mhm.
And, when you feel like your job doesn't matter, when you feel like the things that you do are a total waste of time because there's nothing, it just doesn't count, then that's, I think, about as soul crushing as it gets. And so
Mhm.
that search for impact and to be able to really see your fingerprints on things that are better because you were there than if you weren't, and the impact on people that you can make along the way. I mean, that's really what it's all about.
Well, Tammy, I think that's a great note for us to end on. We're at the end of our time. Where can people find out more about your organization? How can they get in touch with you?
Great. So you can certainly find us on LinkedIn, right? So make sure you connect with me, Tammy Alvarez, on LinkedIn. I've got a new book out. So I'd love to talk about the book. It's called Escaping the Career Trap: Transform Your Apathy into Ambition and Never Hate Mondays Again.
Ooh, I love it.
It's a nice, sexy title. Hang on a second. It's got golden handcuffs on the front. So you can kind of see, where everybody is struggling with. You can get that on Amazon, in soft cover, but you can also go to Escaping the Career Trap website and get discounts on the hardcover, as well as some other really cool promotionals, things that we're offering. And then I also do keynote speeches. So we've got 7 coaches here to serve. And then I take the stage on the regular basis, just in terms of motivational and instructional keynotes for companies around the world. So there's lots of ways that we can engage. So whether it's through Escaping the Career Trap or the Career Winner Circle website, we're here to serve and happy to help wherever we can.
Excellent. And we will be featuring Escaping the Career Trap as our Rise reads.
Thank
So
you.
that'll be coming up soon. So we will make sure that that goes out on all of our social media as well. And for those of you who want more information on Envision Rise, you can find us at envisionrise.com. Tammy, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for the invite. This has been so much fun. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And so with your help, we can get this message to more people. Subscribe, rate, and review the show, and be a part of making a difference, because it starts with you.